In the spring of 217 BC, the Roman Republic was in a state of growing alarm. A new and formidable enemy had arrived on Italian soil, Hannibal Barca, commander of the Carthaginian armies, a man whose very name would soon strike fear throughout the ancient world. Just a year earlier, he had done the impossible, crossed the Pyrenees, the Alps, and invaded Italy, leading an army battered by snow, starvation, and attrition, yet hardened into the most dangerous force Rome had ever faced. Rome was stunned, but not yet afraid. The Senate believed this young Carthaginian general could be contained, crushed, and driven back into the mountains. After all, Rome had survived. Pyrrhus had triumphed over countless Italian rivals, and had transformed itself into the dominant power of the Western Mediterranean. Hannibal, they believed, was merely the latest challenger. But Rome was wrong. After destroying a Roman army at the Battle of the Trebia, Hannibal had shown the world that he was not an ordinary commander. He was a master of deception, a strategist of genius, and a man utterly determined to avenge Carthage for its humiliation in the First Punic War. His goal was nothing less than the destruction of Roman power, and he had come to Italy to achieve it. In Rome, political divisions now ran deep. The Senate was split between those urging caution and those demanding aggression. Among the latter was Gaius Flaminius, a popular leader and fiercely ambitious consul. Flaminius despised hesitation. He was convinced that bold action alone could save Rome and restore her honor after the humiliation at Trebia. He demanded a decisive confrontation. The Senate reluctantly agreed. Flaminius marched north with a fresh Roman army, tens of thousands of infantry and cavalry, determined to catch Hannibal, corner him, and force him into a traditional battle. A battle Flaminius believed Rome would surely win. But Hannibal knew this man. He studied his temperament, his pride, his impulsiveness, and he devised a plan that could only come from a commander of extraordinary imagination. Crossing the Apennines in brutal weather, Hannibal's army advanced through flooded plains, swollen rivers, and choking marshlands. Many soldiers collapsed from exhaustion, horses drowned. Even Hannibal himself suffered an infection in one eye, left him partially blind. Yet he pressed on, refusing to slow his march, determined to stay ahead of Flaminius and keep the initiative. By early June, Hannibal reached a narrow stretch of land along the northern shore of Lake Trasimene, a long, mist-covered expanse of water nestled between steep hills and tight passes. Here, he saw his opportunity. It was the perfect killing ground. The terrain formed a natural trap, a winding road pressed between the lake on one side and rising ridgelines on the other. If the Romans marched through in column, they would be blind to the hills above them, blind to what Hannibal was preparing. In the shadowed heights, hidden by thick, early morning fog, Hannibal concealed his best troops: Libyan spearmen, Iberian infantry, Celtic warriors, and cavalry placed with precision along the ridges. His formations stretched for miles, undetectable from below. No Roman scout saw them. No messenger warned of danger. Not a single rider escaped the silence of the valley. Hannibal himself waited calmly at the far end of the pass, positioned to block the Roman vanguard. His brother Mago and his cavalry lay in ambush along the slopes. All was prepared. When Flaminius arrived at dawn, he was furious to learn that Hannibal had slipped ahead once more. Impatient and convinced that Hannibal was fleeing, he ordered the entire Roman army to march immediately, without proper scouting, without reconnaissance, and without formation, straight into the trap. As the Roman columns wound deeper into the valley, mist clung to the lake. Visibility shrank to a few dozen paces. The Romans could hear water lapping at the shore, but little else. Their officers struggled to maintain order in the gloom. Then, as the last Roman units entered the narrowest point of the pass, Hannibal raised his hand. A signal sounded, and chaos erupted. From every ridge, from every slope, from every hidden crevice of the hills above them, the Carthaginian army came crashing down onto the marching Romans. Celtic warriors screamed their battle cries. Iberians hurled javelins. Libyan spearmen charged in disciplined formations. Cavalry thundered down slopes that moments earlier had seemed empty. Flaminius had no time to form ranks, no time to organize, no time even to understand what was happening. Hannibal had unleashed the largest ambush the ancient world had ever seen. The Battle of Lake Trasimene had begun. The Roman army, caught off guard and stretched out in marching formation, was instantly thrown into panic. In the thick fog rolling off Lake Trasimene, soldiers could barely see more than a few steps ahead. Shouts of alarm echoed through the valley as Carthaginian war cries erupted from the hills. What Flaminius had mistaken for another opportunity to chase down a retreating enemy had in fact become a nightmare, one engineered with chilling precision. At the center of the chaos, Gaius Flaminius, the proud Roman consul, attempted to rally his troops. But the situation was beyond salvaging. Instead of a battlefield, he found himself in a death trap, a narrow corridor, squeezed between steep hills and an unforgiving lake. With no room to maneuver and no visibility to assess the enemy's attack, Flaminius was commanding an army that was effectively blind. Hannibal's infantry smashed into the Roman flank with overwhelming momentum. Celtic warriors, huge men, bare-chested, painted, roaring with furitor through Roman lines in the fog, their long swords swinging with devastating force. Iberian infantry fought with disciplined aggression, striking with short, stabbing blades, exploiting gaps, collapsing formations, plunging into the dense Roman mass where shields and movement jammed together. Above them, from the slopes, darts, stones, and javelins rained down. Roman soldiers raised shields reflexively, but they couldn't see where the attacks were coming from. Every direction seemed hostile. Every step could lead deeper into the massacre. On the Roman left, the waters of the lake caught the terrified soldiers as they tried to flee. Some waded in chest-deep, hoping to evade the onslaught. Many drowned, dragged down by the weight of their armor. Others tried to swim to safety only to be struck down by missiles or overwhelmed by waves as panic spread. Flaminius, seeing disaster closing in on all sides, tried desperately to restore order. He shouted commands, called for standards to rally around, and attempted to form defensive positions, but none of it mattered. The fog swallowed his orders, his signals vanished. His army was fighting dozens of disconnected battles, each man trying to survive without knowing where the enemy or his own comrades stood. Meanwhile, Hannibal stood watching from a vantage point, calm and perfectly aware of the battle unfolding exactly as he had envisioned. No flaws, no surprises. Every movement of the Roman army predicted, every decision of Flaminius anticipated. The trap was flawless. To press the advantage, Hannibal unleashed his Numidian cavalry, some of the fastest and most agile horsemen in the ancient world. Their sudden charge into the Roman rear extinguished the last Roman hope of regrouping. Isolated pockets of resistance were encircled and crushed. Roman cavalry, trapped between the hills and the lake, had no space to maneuver. Many were ridden down. Others dismounted and tried to flee on foot. In the fog and confusion, Flaminius fought bravely, if futilely. Surrounded by enemies and abandoned by many of his officers, he pressed forward with only a handful of men still at his side. A Celtic warrior, towering and snarling, confronted him. Flaminius drove his sword into the barbarian's shield, but the next moment, the consul was struck through the chest by a spear. He collapsed into the mud, dying amid the screams of his soldiers, just another casualty in the chaos he had marched straight into. Word of Flaminius's death rippled through the Roman ranks, deepening the panic. Without leadership, the army's collapse accelerated. More and more men broke formation, fleeing toward the lake or blindly up the hillsides, where Iberian infantry descended upon them without mercy. For nearly 3 hours, the slaughter continued until, finally, the fog lifted. What it revealed was one of the most catastrophic defeats in Roman history. The entire valley was carpeted with bodies, Roman soldiers sprawled among broken shields, smashed helmets, and shattered weapons. The lake's waters were stained red, littered with floating corpses. Smoke from burning equipment and shattered wagons drifted across the battlefield. Hannibal surveyed the aftermath with cold satisfaction. His ambush had not merely defeated a Roman army, had annihilated it. More than 15,000 Romans lay dead. Another 10,000 were captured. Not a single Roman unit had escaped intact. But Hannibal knew Rome would not give up. This victory, spectacular as it was only one step in a far longer war. A war he had come to fight to its bitter end. As the Carthaginians gathered spoils and tended to the wounded, Hannibal issued a command that reflected both his strategic foresight and his political acumen. All captured Italian allies were to be released, unharmed and unarmed. But Roman citizens, legionaries, remained prisoners. It was a calculated message. Hannibal wanted Italy to see him not as a conqueror, but as a liberator, a defender against Roman arrogance, a commander who showed respect to those coerced into Rome's wars. And for many Italians, his message hit its mark. The shockwaves of Trasimene spread across the peninsula. Towns wavered in their loyalty. Roman confidence shattered. And in Rome, fear swept through the Senate, as a stark reality became impossible to deny. Hannibal Barca was not simply invading Italy. He was dismantling Rome's military reputation battle by battle. But the true reckoning was still approaching. Rome, desperate and terrified, would now turn to a single man. A man whose name would become synonymous with caution, discipline, and survival. Quintus Fabius Maximus, the Delayer. And he would now face the greatest commander of his age. While the valley of Lake Trasimene lay silent under the weight of Roman defeat, the shock of Hannibal's victory spread like wildfire across the Italian peninsula. In Rome, the news hit with the force of a hammer. The Senate, already divided and deeply anxious after the loss at Trebia, now faced something far worse: the annihilation of an entire Roman army, the death of their consul, and a Carthaginian force that had once again outmaneuvered them with terrifying precision. The people panicked. Rumors flooded the streets. Some claimed Hannibal was already marching on the capital. Others whispered that Rome had no army left to defend itself. Mothers cried for sons lost in the fog at Trasimene. The Senate feared unrest, even rebellion. It was a moment of existential crisis, a moment when Rome could have fractured under fear and uncertainty. To restore order, the Senate turned to an ancient institution reserved only for moments of utter peril: the dictatorship. They appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus, an experienced statesman known for his calm, measured judgment. At 60, he was no glory-seeking youth. He was a man shaped by decades of war and politics, one who understood that Rome could not survive another catastrophic defeat. Fabius quickly realized what few in Rome wished to admit: no Roman general alive could defeat Hannibal in open battle. Not yet. The Carthaginian commander had proven his genius twice, and his army, though smaller, was far more experienced, more cohesive, more confident. His cavalry outmatched Rome's at every turn. His tactics were unpredictable, and his leadership inspired absolute loyalty. But Fabius also understood something about Hannibal that Roman pride had blinded others from seeing. A commander this bold, this aggressive, this tactically brilliant could be beaten, just not by chasing him. So Fabius made a decision that would forever etch his name into military history. He would refuse battle. Instead, he would shadow Hannibal's movements, harassing his foraging parties, cutting off supply lines, burning fields ahead of his march, and denying him the chance to replenish his resources. The Roman army would march parallel to the Carthaginians, close enough to hinder, but never close enough to be destroyed. It was a strategy of exhaustion, a strategy of patience, a strategy Romans hated. To them, Fabius seemed weak, cowardly, afraid. They wanted vengeance for Trasimene, not caution. They wanted another Scipio, another Marcellus, another hero to throw Hannibal back into the mountains. Instead, they got a man who avoided battle at every turn. Hannibal, however, instantly recognized Fabius's brilliance. The Carthaginian general understood that this strategy threatened him more than any battlefield clash. His army was far from home, dependent on plunder and the goodwill or fear of Italian towns. If Rome denied him supplies, if they forced him into a war of endurance, the advantage could shift. But Hannibal was not a man to be cornered quietly. Determined to break Fabius's strategy, he led his army into rich Roman territories, burning estates, capturing livestock, and creating havoc in regions previously untouched by the war. He even marched through the Falernian mountains, ravaging fields before withdrawing through passes the Romans believed impassable. At Falanus, Fabius thought he had finally trapped Hannibal. With high ridges surrounding the valley and a single pass guarded by Roman soldiers, it appeared Hannibal's army would be starved into surrender. Roman morale soared. Senators celebrated. Even ordinary citizens whispered that perhaps the Delayer had outsmarted the Carthaginian after all. But Hannibal had anticipated this too. That night, he ordered thousands of oxen to be gathered, their horns wrapped in resin-soaked cloth. As darkness fell, the cloth was ignited, turning the mountainside into a winding river of fire. Seeing the lights, Roman patrols believed Hannibal was escaping across the ridges. They rushed to block him, abandoning their designated posts. But the lights were a deception. The oxen bolted wildly up the slopes, scattering flames across the high mountain paths. Meanwhile, in the valley below, Hannibal led his entire army, infantry, cavalry, and supplies through the now unguarded pass. By dawn, Fabius realized he had been fooled. Again. The Carthaginian army escaped completely intact, leaving the Romans with nothing to show for their moment of confidence except embarrassment and frustration. Fabius's political enemies seized the moment, mocking him publicly, calling him timid, accusing him of dragging out the war. But Fabius was not deterred. He knew that Hannibal's genius was powered by momentum. If Rome denied him decisive victories, if they forced him into a slow war, Carthage's invasion would eventually collapse under its own weight. And for a moment, it seemed the strategy might work. Yet Rome was a republic, governed not just by wisdom, but by pride. The people demanded action. The Senate feared appearing weak, and the pressure grew unbearable. When Fabius's term ended, Rome abandoned his strategy. In the elections that followed, the people chose 2 new consulsmen who promised to restore Roman honor by taking the fight directly to Hannibal. Men who vowed to crush the Carthaginian menace once and for all. They assembled the largest army Rome had ever fielded, 8 legions, nearly 90,000 men, a force so massive that Rome believed no commander alive could defeat it. Hannibal watched this unfolding with cold clarity. He had defeated Roman armies before. He had humiliated Roman pride. But now, Rome was preparing something new, something far larger, far more desperate. And Hannibal knew where this path would lead. To a small town in Apulia. To a battlefield he would shape with genius. To a slaughter that would eclipse all others. Cannae. But before the world witnessed that catastrophe, the shadow of Lake Trasimene continued to loom over Rome, a reminder of the price of arrogance and the brilliance of the general who had brought the Republic to its knees. For weeks after the disaster at Lake Trasimene, the Roman Republic struggled to regain its balance. The very foundations of Roman military prestige had been shaken. Hannibal's mastery of strategy, his ability to manipulate terrain, his gift for predicting Roman behavior, all had converged into one of the most devastating ambushes in the history of warfare. But the war was far from over. In fact, it was entering its most dangerous phase. Having secured another astonishing victory, Hannibal now faced a delicate challenge. He was deep in enemy territory, surrounded by hostile towns, and his forces were far smaller than Rome's overall manpower. Every victory bought him time, supplies, and allies, but every step deeper into Italy also stretched his resources thinner. He needed support. He needed Italian allies to rise against Rome, so he set about shaping not just the battlefield, but public sentiment. In the aftermath of Trasimene, Hannibal released all Italian prisoners without ransom, while retaining Roman citizens. He treated the locals with respect, paid for supplies when feasible, and avoided unnecessary brutality. Where Roman governors had demanded taxes, Hannibal offered freedom. Where Rome enforced obedience, Hannibal promised liberation from the Republic's domination. Some Italian city-states began to waver, others quietly sent envoys, and many ordinary citizens viewed Hannibal not as a foreign invader, but as a potential savior from Roman oppression. The psychological war had begun. Meanwhile, Rome reeled from the political shockwaves. The Senate, recognizing the scale of the crisis, appointed new commanders, reorganized supply lines, and fortified key positions across the peninsula. Fear lingered in every corner of the Republic, but so did resolve. Rome had been wounded, but Rome was not dead. As summer turned to autumn in 217 BC, Hannibal marched steadily southward, skirting the Apennines, ravaging Roman-aligned territories, and replenishing his army with supplies seized from wealthy estates. His movements were unpredictable. One day he'd be in Etruria, the next near Apulia, then drifting into Samnium. Roman generals scrambled to keep up, but found themselves constantly outmaneuvered. Still, Hannibal's victories had consequences. His army, though hardened, was losing men to wounds, disease, desertion, and constant marshes. Replacements were limited. He could not afford another hard-fought battle unless it promised overwhelming gain. Yet Rome was beginning to adapt. Their commanders grew more cautious, more aware of Hannibal's tricks. Scouts were better deployed, ambushes avoided, supply routes protected. The shock of Trasimene had forced Rome to evolve. Hannibal needed something spectacular, something that would shatter Roman confidence once and for all and convince Italy to rise against the Republic. And soon, an opportunity emerged. In Rome, after months of political pressure, the cautious strategy of Fabius Maximus was cast aside. His refusal to fight Hannibal had preserved Roman armies, but bruised Roman pride. Now, that pride demanded a direct confrontation. So the Senate assembled the largest army Rome had ever fielded, 8 legions, tens of thousands of auxiliaries, and a cavalry force designed to finally counter Hannibal's feared horsemen. 2 new consuls, Lucius, Aemilius, Paulus, and Gaius, Terentius Varro, were chosen to lead this massive host. One advocated caution, the other demanded aggressive action. But together, they commanded a force so enormous that Rome believed Hannibal could not possibly defeat it. Hannibal watched this coalition gather with a mix of anticipation and calculation. He understood Rome's psychology better than many Roman leaders did themselves. He knew that after Trasimene and Trebia, pride demanded redemption, and pride, Hannibal understood, was a weapon. He would use it. Rome marched with confidence, and in some cases, arrogance toward the plains of Cannae, a small settlement in southeastern Italy whose flat terrain seemed tailor-made for Roman infantry. But Hannibal saw something very different. He saw a battlefield he could shape into a masterpiece. A place where numbers could be turned against the Romans. A place where terrain, dust, wind, and formation depth could weave together into the greatest tactical encirclement the ancient world would ever witness. But that moment belonged to the future. For now, Hannibal paused his army near the Ophedus River and prepared for the battle that would define his legacy and haunt Roman memory for centuries. Yet even as he prepared, the shadow of Lake Trasimene lingered in his mind, not as a lesson, but as validation. The ambush at the lake was not merely a victory. It had been a demonstration of his complete command over the art of deception, manipulation, and strategic surprise. It had proven to Italy that Rome was not invincible. It had shown the world that brilliance on the battlefield could reshape the destiny of nations. For Rome, the battle at Trasimene remained a scar, a reminder that a single moment of arrogance could bring an empire to its knees. The Senate would remember it. The people would remember it. And Hannibal, above all, understood its true value. Because Trasimene had not simply won him a battle, it had won him momentum. And with that momentum, Hannibal would soon march toward the most catastrophic defeat Rome had ever suffered. A defeat so total, so horrifying, that it would become synonymous with annihilation. The Battle of Cannae awaited. But the world would never forget what happened on that mist-shrouded morning along the shores of Lake Trasimene, where Hannibal Barca, the Lion of Carthage, rose from brilliant commander to legendary conqueror, carving his name forever into the chronicles of war.